Laura never thought her life would spiral into the chaos that now surrounded her. Married to Ethan for nearly a decade, they had built what seemed to be an ideal life together. Their cozy home, shared dreams, and the laughter that once echoed through their halls painted a picture of happiness. But underneath the surface, Laura had been grappling with feelings of stagnation. What started as an innocent friendship with a colleague turned into a betrayal that would unravel everything. The affair wasn't premeditated. It crept in during moments when Laura felt unseen and unappreciated. Ethan, burdened by work pressures, had become distant. The small flirtations she exchanged with Daniel, her colleague, grew into something more, fueled by her longing for attention and passion. The night she crossed the line, she knew she was making a choice she could never undo. Guilt consumed her, but she buried it, convincing herself it would pass. Ethan discovered the truth not through confrontation, but through subtle signs. Missed dinners, distant glances, and a misplaced text message. When Laura confessed, his silence was more harrowing than any words could have been. He simply walked away, taking nothing but an overnight bag. The weight of his rejection crushed her, and for the first time, Laura saw the depth of the damage she had caused. The weeks that followed were suffocating. Ethan refused to answer her calls or respond to her messages. She sought therapy, desperate to understand why she had sabotaged the life they had built. As she unraveled her own insecurities and unresolved issues, she realized her affair had been less about Ethan's shortcomings and more about her own fears of inadequacy. Ethan, too, was on a journey of his own. He retreated to his brother's cabin in the mountains, seeking solace in the stillness of nature. There, he reflected on their years together, the good and the bad. Anger and betrayal battled against the love he still felt for her, leaving him torn between holding on and letting go. Months passed before they saw each other again. Laura had written Ethan a letter, pouring out her heart, not to ask for forgiveness, but to express her remorse and take accountability. Ethan, hesitant but curious, agreed to meet her at the park where they had shared their first date. Their conversation was raw and painful. Laura apologized without excuses, tears streaming down her face as she admitted her selfishness and the hurt she had caused. Ethan listened, his expression unreadable, but when he finally spoke, his words were firm. "I can't forget what you've done, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive you." They parted ways that day with no promises of reconciliation. Laura continued her therapy, finding strength in rebuilding herself, while Ethan focused on his healing, leaning on friends and family for support. Over time, their paths crossed occasionally, not as lovers or even as friends, but as two people who had shared a life and now walked separate roads. Years later, they met unexpectedly at a mutual friend's wedding. Laura was vibrant, exuding a confidence Ethan hadn't seen before. Ethan, too, had changed. His eyes no longer carried the weight of betrayal. They spoke briefly, exchanging polite words that gradually deepened into a conversation about their lives. There was no bitterness, only a mutual acknowledgement of the growth they had achieved. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan extended his hand. "Thank you for reminding me that even pain can lead to growth." Laura smiled, a single tear escaping. "And thank you for teaching me the value of what I lost." They walked away from each other that night, not as the couple they once were, but as individuals who had found closure, peace, and an understanding that some wounds, while deep, can lead to unexpected healing. As Laura left the wedding, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. She had spent years haunted by the mistakes she'd made, but for the first time, the burden felt lighter. The words Ethan had spoken lingered in her mind, not as a reproach but as a gift, a reminder that she had faced her darkest moments and come out stronger. Ethan, too, felt a sense of finality that he hadn't anticipated. Seeing Laura again had stirred memories he thought were buried, but it also showed him how far they both had come. The pain of the betrayal was no longer sharp. It had softened into something he could carry without bitterness. For the first time, he felt truly free. In the weeks that followed, They both found themselves reflecting on their brief reunion. Laura began journaling her thoughts, finally allowing herself to let go of the guilt she had clung to for so long. She realized that forgiving herself didn't mean excusing her actions. It meant accepting her humanity and the lessons that came with it. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself revisiting old hobbies he had abandoned during the years of his marriage. He took up photography again, capturing moments that reminded him of life's fleeting beauty. Through the lens of his camera, he rediscovered joy in the simple things. A child's laughter, the glow of a sunset, the way the world seemed to pause in quiet moments. Despite their growth, neither of them had fully closed the chapter they had shared. One day, Ethan decided to write a letter to Laura. He didn't want to rekindle their romance, but he felt compelled to share something he had never been able to articulate face-to-face. "Laura," the letter began, "I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened between us. I've been angry, hurt, and lost, but through it all, I've come to realize that what we had wasn't all bad. You gave me some of the happiest moments of my life, and for that, I'll always be grateful. I'm writing this not to revisit the past, but to tell you that I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger serves no one. I hope you've found peace, as I believe I finally have." When Laura received the letter, she wept. It wasn't just the words Ethan had written, but the weight of knowing that the forgiveness she had craved was finally hers. She wrote back, her response simple yet heartfelt. "Ethan, thank you for your words and your forgiveness. They mean more to me than you'll ever know. I, too, am grateful for the love we shared, even if it didn't last. I wish you all the happiness in the world. You deserve it." From that point on, they rarely crossed paths, but there was no longer a lingering shadow between them. They each moved forward in their lives. Ethan eventually met someone new, a woman who shared his love of photography and adventure. Laura found fulfillment in her career and formed deep, meaningful friendships that enriched her life in ways she hadn't expected. Their story wasn't one of reconciliation, but of growth and understanding. It was proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, that people could learn from their mistakes and emerge better for it. In the end, Laura and Ethan's journey wasn't about finding their way back to each other. It was about finding their way back to themselves years later. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Laura found herself strolling through a small art gallery in the city. She had been invited by a friend who insisted she see a local photography exhibit. The space was warm and inviting, with soft music playing in the background and the hum of quiet conversations filling the air. As she wandered through the exhibits, one particular photograph caught her eye, a breathtaking black and white image of a mist-covered mountain at dawn. There was something familiar about the style, a sense of intimacy in the way the light played against the shadows. She glanced at the placard beneath the frame, and her breath hitched. The photographer was Ethan. Her heart raced as she moved through the exhibit, discovering more of his work. Each photograph told a story, capturing moments of quiet beauty and resilience. It was as if the images held pieces of him, his journey, his pain, and his growth. She felt a swell of pride, knowing how far he had come. As she reached the end of the exhibit, she saw him. Ethan stood near the back of the gallery, speaking with a small group of people. He looked different, yet the same, his posture more confident, his smile genuine. Laura hesitated, unsure if she should approach him, but as if sensing her presence, Ethan turned, his eyes locking with hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan smiled and walked toward her. "Laura," he said warmly, his voice carrying no trace of the tension that once existed between them. "It's good to see you." "You too," she replied, her smile genuine. "Your work is incredible." Thank you," he said, a hint of gratitude in his tone. "Photography has been a lifeline for me. It helped me rediscover who I am." They talked briefly, catching up on their lives. Ethan mentioned his fiancée, a fellow photographer he had met on an assignment, and Laura spoke of her recent travels and the nonprofit organization she had started to support women rebuilding their lives after personal setbacks. Their conversation flowed easily, a testament to the healing they had both undergone. As the evening wound down, Ethan surprised her with an unexpected gesture. "Laura," he said, reaching into his pocket, "I want you to have this." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a print of the mountain photograph that had first caught her eye. On the back, he had written a simple note: "For the journey we both took to find the light." Tears welled in Laura's eyes as she read the words. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly. "This means more to me than you know." They hugged briefly, a gesture not of romance, but of mutual respect and closure. As they parted ways, Laura felt a sense of completeness she hadn't known she needed. She realized that their story, though painful, had shaped her into the person she had become, and she was proud of that person. Ethan watched her leave, a small smile playing on his lips. He, too, felt at peace. Their paths had diverged, but they had both found their way to happiness in their own time, on their own terms. As Laura walked home that night, clutching the photograph, she marveled at life's unpredictability. Sometimes the hardest endings led to the most beautiful beginnings. And while their journey together had ended, the lessons and growth they shared would stay with them forever. In the weeks following her encounter with Ethan at the gallery, Laura found herself reflecting on her own journey with a renewed sense of purpose. The photograph he had given her found a special place in her apartment, not as a reminder of regret, but as a symbol of growth and resilience. It became a quiet inspiration, urging her to continue her work with the nonprofit and help others find their light, just as she had. Meanwhile, Ethan's life began to move forward in ways he hadn't anticipated. His fiancée, Marissa, encouraged him to take his photography to the next level, and together they planned a series of workshops for aspiring photographers. Their shared love of the craft deepened their bond, and Ethan felt a sense of joy he hadn't thought possible years ago. Despite the distance between their lives, Laura and Ethan occasionally exchanged brief emails. Their messages were simple: an update on a new project, a kind word of encouragement, or a shared memory sparked by something small. It was a quiet connection, built not on rekindled feelings, but on mutual respect and a shared understanding of their past. One day, while sifting through old photos for a presentation at her nonprofit, Laura stumbled upon a box of memories from her marriage to Ethan. At first, she hesitated to open it, unsure if she was ready to revisit those moments. But as she thumbed through the photos and mementos, she found herself smiling. There were pictures of vacations, candid moments at home, and silly notes they had written to each other during busy days. These weren't the memories of a failed marriage. They were pieces of a life that had been meaningful, even if it hadn't lasted. Inspired, Laura decided to use her own story as part of her nonprofit's outreach. She began speaking at events, sharing her experiences of heartbreak, accountability, and healing. Her vulnerability resonated with others, and the organization grew as more people sought its guidance. For Laura, helping others navigate their struggles became her way of turning pain into purpose. One day, Ethan attended one of her events without telling her in advance. He sat in the back of the room, listening as Laura spoke with poise and sincerity. She didn't shy away from the hard truths of her past, nor did she paint herself as a victim. Instead, she spoke about growth, forgiveness, and the power of starting over. Ethan felt a swell of pride, knowing how far she had come. After the event, he approached her, catching her by surprise. "You were incredible up there," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Ethan," she said, her face lighting up, "I didn't know you were here. I wanted to see for myself the work you're doing," he replied. "It's amazing, Laura. You've turned your story into something that's helping so many people." Her cheeks flushed with gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." They chatted briefly before parting ways again, but this time, the interaction felt different. It wasn't about closure or tying up loose ends. It was simply two people acknowledging the positive impact they had on each other's lives, even after all the hurt. In the years that followed, Laura's nonprofit continued to thrive, and Ethan's photography reached audiences around the world. Though their lives remained separate, their stories occasionally intersected in unexpected ways. A mutual friend sharing news, a mention of one's work in the other circles. Each time, it brought a quiet smile, a reminder that some connections, no matter how they change, leave a lasting imprint. Their journey had taught them both that even the most painful chapters could lead to profound growth. And though their paths had diverged long ago, they each carried forward the lessons of their shared history, walking their respective roads with gratitude, strength, and hope for the future.